Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. For today's video, we're going to be talking about whether or not you should write about COVID-19 in your Common App application, and if so, what should you say and where does it belong in the application itself? Now, if you aren't using the Common App, maybe you're doing the UC application or the Coalition app or another separate application, these tips will still likely apply. So one thing to keep in mind is that the Common App has added a new question. It is optional, but it is a space where students are given up to 250 words to explain their experience with COVID-19. And I think this is to most students' benefit because it means that you can address it there, and that way you don't have to actually address it in the additional information section or in your personal statement. So for most students, this is going to be the way to go. You would actually just write it in that box that allows you 250 words. And yes, you can type it out ahead of time on a document, and that actually might be a good idea because that way you can just copy and paste it. And if you're doing multiple applications, let's say you're doing the Common App and the Coalition app, you've got it done, and that way you could use it for both applications. So that is going to be the number one priority. If you do want to write about COVID-19, you should start with that question. Now, I did mention that there is an additional information section. So on the Common App and several other applications as well, there is a question that basically allows you about 650 words to explain anything else that you want the college to know about you that is lacking elsewhere in the application. And so my intention is to do a separate video on what you should and should not say in the additional information section. But for COVID-19, if there is no COVID question on an application that you're working on, then yes, it would be appropriate to include that in the additional information section. However, with the Common App, since there already is a question about it, unless you simply cannot explain your experience and the impact of that experience in 250 words, then you don't really need to include it in the additional information section. So one thing to keep in mind is that there is also the personal statement. Some applications actually have more than one, it just depends, but for the Common App, you are to write a personal statement, and they give you different essay prompts. And while these prompts could be turned into a response about COVID-19, if you've mentioned it elsewhere, let's say for that question or in the additional information section, I wouldn't necessarily recommend having the focal point of that response being COVID-19 because it's going to seem a little bit too much. So one thing I would recommend that you think about is that a college application needs to be balanced. You want to show a true portrait of who you are. So it is possible that you might bring up COVID somehow in the essay, but I would discourage you from having it be the central focus unless there is absolutely a major reason for that. So one thing to keep in mind is that quite frankly, by adding that COVID-19 question, it is kind of the Common App's way of signaling, hey, this is where we want that information to be. That way it frees up space for you to show other aspects of your personality and your experiences in those other sections. So just kind of keep that in mind as you guys are planning your Common App and what you should say. So now the question becomes, what do you actually say in these 250 words? So regardless of your experience, let's think of it in two parts. What happened and how did it affect you? So did it lead to personal growth or new knowledge about yourself? Did it lead to an adversity that you had to overcome? That kind of thing. Another thing to consider is that there are going to be a range of possible experiences surrounding COVID-19. So some of you might have had a negative experience. Others might have had a positive experience, as weird as that might sound. Some of you might have had a mixture. Maybe it started out negative and then got better, or maybe it started out okay and then took a turn for the worse. And then there are those of you who might not have been very affected at all. If that's the case, if you weren't very affected by COVID-19, then I don't think you need to actually include anything in the optional section because quite frankly, you don't want to try to exaggerate your circumstances. But if the other situations apply to you, then it is possible that you might want to include that in that question. So let's talk about a negative impact first. It's possible that during the past couple months, maybe a parent or guardian lost his or her job and that affected your family's income. Maybe you needed to take on a job to help out your family, and maybe that meant it was really hard to keep up with schoolwork. You might have had technology problems as far as distance learning and virtual instruction, or maybe isolation in general impacted your mental health. So those could be things that you might want to talk about if that was a negative influence. So now let's talk about the positive experiences. Maybe this time allowed you to reconnect with family or friends or your community, and you've had some kind of breakthrough because of that. Maybe you've used the past couple months to learn a new skill, and you've been focusing on intellectual curiosity for the past couple months. That's okay too. That is a positive outcome. And as far as the mixture where it either started bad and got better, or started better and then got worse, it really depends on what those circumstances were, but depending on that shift, you might want to write about that as well. So if you decide that you do in fact want to write about COVID-19, it's important to know how to do so. Most responses are going to be very matter of fact. You're not necessarily going to have the word count space to include dialogue or description, and that's okay. Just get to the heart of the matter. What happened and why is it important? So to demonstrate this, I actually wrote 2 sample responses. These are not based off of anyone's real experience. This is just something that I created for demonstration purposes. And so we're going to look at 2 samples. One is a bit more of a reflection on a negative experience and just explaining the hardships. And the other is more of a positive experience, kind of demonstrating some personal growth.
So let's go ahead and look at this first example. Now, again, this is not from a real student. This is just something that I made up for demonstration purposes. So you'll notice that this is broken up into 4 paragraphs. And in the first paragraph, the student mentions that he or she is from a rural area, and because of that, they don't really have good internet access at home. Now, normally this student would actually just do online work at school. However, with school closures due to COVID-19, the student wasn't able to do the necessary work because of a lack of consistent internet. So in this first paragraph, the student gives context to what happened. Basically, the student did not have consistent internet access due to COVID-19. So in the second paragraph, the student actually concedes that the school did make some adjustments. For instance, they offered students Chromebooks to take home. However, this student's issue was not a lack of devices, but rather a lack of good internet. You also notice that the paragraph mentions other siblings. So this is a way to hint to the person that's reading your application that you come from a family with multiple school-age kids. Obviously, that comes with additional expenses. And so because of that, there was not enough bandwidth for all of them to do their digital instruction. You'll also notice in the last sentence here that it says, "My brother and I are both AP students, and most of the work was online." So this is a way to indicate that not only is this student in AP classes, but also these classes involved a lot of online instruction. So this indicates that the student was in rigorous classes. Now, honestly, the people looking at your application will also have access to your transcripts eventually, but it is okay to embed that information in your essays like this because it does give a sense of who you are. Now, if you're not in AP classes, it's totally okay, but this is a way to kind of show a little bit about the course load that you're taking. So in the third paragraph, we have another layer. So not only is internet a problem, but now we have this reference to the fact that the dad's work hours had been reduced, and so consequently, there's less income coming in. So we have a quick reference to the family's financial situation. And so it says that upgrading to a better internet package was not an option. In fact, they had to cancel their services altogether. So this means that the family was negatively impacted in terms of income because of COVID-19. Now, the student doesn't go into tremendous detail here, but it is enough to give a little bit of context as to what life was like during this time period and what hardships this family faced. Notice that it's not melodramatic, it's very factual, just letting the person know here's what happened. So now let's look at the fourth paragraph, because in this paragraph, we want to see a bit of reflection. We want to see how this experience affected the student. So you'll notice that it says that the student remained committed to his or her education. Each day, the student would drive to a hotspot in town in order to complete schoolwork. So this shows that the student is a problem solver. They were faced with adversity and they figured out a way to get everything done. And that's a good trait to have as a person in general. And that, I think, would be viewed favorably because the student is somebody who doesn't just give up, they find another way. So then it says that the student had a bit of difficulty completing the assignments, and to be honest, that's okay. It's okay to admit that you're not perfect because nobody expects you to be perfect. So if you had struggles that you're still working through or that you didn't quite overcome the way most people would expect, you don't have this like valiant story, that's okay. This is honest. This is telling who you are and what your experience was. So at the end, there is that final sentence that just kind of sums everything up. Nevertheless, I was able to find places with public Wi-Fi to complete my AP work for my junior year. So just another reference to the fact that this person is a problem solver, and also another reference to AP work just to show the student's dedication. So from reading this essay, and this is a fictional essay, but I would expect this student to be a hard worker, somebody who's dedicated, somebody who is, like I said, a problem solver, also somebody who dealt with some hardships during COVID-19. Now, this essay is not over dramatic, but we do have reference to a lack of internet and also a reference to limited income. So how much you disclose is up to you, but this is a very matter-of-fact response. And I think this would be appropriate in response to the COVID-19 question. Now let's scroll down a bit and look at this second example. So this one is different. It is a bit more positive, but it also has a reflective quality to it. So I want to walk you guys through this example. So this particular example is talking about softball. You can see that it says, at the start of the 2020 softball season, my primary goal was to focus on demonstrating the leadership needed to hopefully be named captain for my senior year. So from this opening sentence, we know that this person is on the softball team and they consider themselves a leader. They want to be named captain. So this person has a goal in mind, which is important. And then it starts to talk about how once school shut down, then sports stopped as well. The student says, at first I was heartbroken. So it is okay to admit that you had these feelings. It is okay to admit that not everything was okay. It's okay to say that you were disappointed. And so the student does that here and then talks about how there were larger concerns than softball. So the next sentence, starting with while I understood, that sentence adds a layer of maturity. The student is not so self-centered as to think that softball is the most important thing, but at the same time, we get a sense that softball is important to this particular individual. Then we have this realization that even though the games were canceled, this person could still be a leader and that the team could still work together in some way. So this is kind of showing the, pros of COVID-19. This person had a bit of a rocky experience in the beginning perhaps, but overall a positive experience. I also like the contrast or the little bit of tension that is set up in this paragraph because we get insight into the way this person thinks. So then in the second paragraph, the student talks about what she did. So this student organized virtual workouts, and it talks about how it built camaraderie amongst the team. And then this turned into a community project. So they took this idea of virtual workouts, and this student extended it into the community, working with younger individuals. So not only does this essay establish a leadership quality about this person, but this person is also a problem solver and they are a volunteer. This person is able to not only connect with their peers, but also younger individuals. And so we see this idea that the student took a problem and then actually found a solution and then turned that solution into an even bigger project. So that shows that this student is very thoughtful and also that this student likes to not only help others, but also think about ways to improve the community. So then in the last paragraph, there's a little bit more reflection, basically the overall lesson learned, almost like the moral of the story, so to speak. And that is that a person doesn't need to be captain to be a leader. So there's kind of a sum up sentence there: grappling with my emotions and deciding to change my perspective allowed me to not only connect with my teammates, but also positively impact some younger members of my community. So basically, that last sentence tells us exactly what we need to know about this person's experience. So these were two examples, and again, these are ones that I made up. However, I think some of you might be able to relate to elements of these two responses. I hope this video was helpful in demonstrating how you might answer a question about COVID-19. Both of these responses are under 250 words. They are very close to that limit though. So you can see that in 250 words, you can get 3 or 4 short paragraphs if you want to. So you want to emphasize the hardships perhaps that you faced, and also the benefits of that. And you want to think about what it reveals about your personality and your character. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, do me a huge favor and give this video a thumbs up. And until next time, guys, happy writing!